now open this meeting of the British Astronomical Association here in the Institute of Physics. The first thing, I'm the President, David Arditti, and the first thing I usually do is ask if there are any new members who have never been to a meeting before, who are here today, and I'd like to welcome you. Is there anybody who has never been to a BAA meeting before? Oh, there's several. Would you like to come up? And
I don't have my talk ready, I'm afraid, sorry.
Just tell me your name.
It's John.
John, welcome to the BAA, and hope you have a nice time with us. And who else was it?
I'm Nigel.
Welcome, Nigel.
Thank you.
And I hope you have a long and happy association with us. And there's one other over here somewhere. Yes.
And Steve, I'm your first speaker.
And Steve. Stephen Cookson. Thank you very much. Right. I'll now call on the paper secretary, Jeremy Shears, to tell us what papers have been approved at the council meeting.
Indeed, thank you, David. So 4 papers were approved at this afternoon's council meeting for publication in the journal in due course, and I will list the names. Mervyn Vincent Jones, amateur astronomer of Maryborough, Queensland. That's by Peter Anderson. Sunspots noticed accidentally, a preliminary survey by John Simpson. Selenahelion, imaging the sun and the full moon at the same time with one camera by Stephen J. Edberg and Stephen Abelha. And the 4th paper is The Size of the Carrington Event Sunspot Group by Peter Meadows.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'll tell you about the forthcoming events. We've got a Comet section meeting soon. On 8th of July, that will take place at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich. That's a whole day on Saturday, on the 8th of July, and it looks like it's going to be a very interesting event, being organised by Nick James. So you book up for that on the website. There's a meeting of the SPA on the 29th of July at University College, and BAA members are welcome to go to that as well. That's another Saturday meeting. Then we have, on Saturday the 2nd of September, we have a variable star section meeting. So it's very good that we've got so many sections that are actively organising meetings this year. We've had quite a few already, and we've got this one coming up as well, and that will be in Northampton at the Humphrey Rooms. And again, you can book up for that on the website. And then our next big general BAA meeting will be our autumn weekend meeting over the weekend of Friday the 22nd to Sunday the 24th of September. And that will be at Leicester University. And that's being organised by Hazel Collett and Paul Abel, and it's on the subject of practical amateur astronomy. So that will be a feast of talks all about what we do. Then the next meeting, BAA meeting here, will be on Wednesday the 25th of October, and that will be our AGM here at the Institute of Physics. So this meeting is the meeting that used to be in late May. So that will be, going forward, we will always have this meeting in June now. So we've closed up that gap slightly. We always had traditionally an extremely long gap between the last spring meeting and the AGM in late October. But in future, we will have this meeting in early June to slightly close up that gap. So we've got things all over the summer, section meetings and the autumn weekend meeting at Leicester University. Now, I was contacted recently by, well, he was already an acquaintance of mine, Stephen Cookson, who's the chair of Crawley Astronomical Society, about a big telescope. And he has a plan for what to do with this major telescope, and he'd like to tell us something about it. So Stephen, can you come up, please?
Hi. Thank you for welcoming me.
It is. That's one. Is it touch? I don't know. Yes. Right. Coming up. Yeah.
I don't know what to do now, actually.
So you just,
Should I just hold the laptop up for you? So you can...
David, I think you just need to put it on slideshow because it's on preview mode.
All right. Slideshow.
Just do that then.
Great. Right. So tell us about this, Stephen.
Is this yours, David? Could I put this down there or something so I don't knock it? Okay. So, look at the size of that scope.
And speak into the microphone in the
Sorry,
centre.
okay. Look at the size of that scope. It's a huge telescope. And we have been trying for some time now to get scopes into schools successfully. And it hasn't been really very easy. So I'm the chair, as David said, of the Crawley Astronomical Society. And we didn't have a telescope at all. I mean, we didn't have an observatory at all. So we looked around and we found a local school with some big playing fields who were keen to have an observatory. So we bought a 10-inch SCT, and we bought a pulsar observatory, and we laid some concrete. Actually, the school laid the concrete, and we installed the observatory and put in the telescope. And it took, I think we started this journey in the first year of COVID, so middle of 2020. And we had the headmaster and the head of science in the observatory having a go at it, watching Venus about 2 months ago. And it has been like pulling teeth. So we've had a couple of assemblies. We've had a competition for naming the telescope, Star Lab, since you ask. And it's been fun, but quite hard. And at the moment, we're trying to get them to commit to a brainstorming session for how we can support them during the education process. However, maybe word of this got ahead of us, and that we were then approached by ESAS Society, who have a 16-inch Meade, very huge, and they were being chucked by the farmer out of their piece of land, and they had to get rid of the observatory and the telescope. So we said we'd have a look around, and we found another local school, a secondary school this time, who would take the 16-inch Meade. We sent it off down to Deal in Kent to have it refurbished. And I am at the process at the moment, so this is scope 2, and it's already been 8 months, I guess. We're trying to get the scope delivered, but there's exams, there's half term, there's sorting out next term's agenda and schedule, and getting hold of the groundsman and all sorts of things. And we'll be lucky if we get it delivered by the end of term, and the refurbisher is complaining that it's taking up his space. Okay, however, the word is still going out, and MCAS, Mid-Kent Astronomical Society, contacted me, I guess just after Christmas, and said, we have also been given notice to quit on our shed, and can we do something? So I reached out to a couple of schools in Kent, first of all Sutton Valence School, who said yes, and then when they understood the sort of magnitude of the project, they ghosted me. And I haven't heard from them again. So I reached out to Benenden School, and Benenden School has been amazingly enthusiastic. Very, very, very enthusiastic. But I just don't want it to fall through again. This is the biggest and the most amazing professional research-grade telescope that has passed through our hands. It's quite old, 1967, but it would be a crime to let it go to the scrap merchant, which is, the backup choice for MCAS. Okay, let's have a go. So, I'd like to wander around. This was its original house. It's the Royal Observatory in Edinburgh. At least I think it is. Google Images says it is. And it's a wonderful and amazing scope. with a wonderful heritage. It was used for training astronomers, and I would like for it to continue to inspire and train astronomers. So MCAS has approached me, and I have been in touch with the head of science several times at Benenden. Look at this place; it's a stunning. It's a huge green site in the middle of Kent with dark sky, or relatively dark skies, as dark as they get in this country, and they have just finished a huge centenary building project to build a music centre, which cost them millions of quid. I don't know exactly how many, but a lot of money. And it struck me that we might be able to encourage them to do something similar for a large telescope. And you can see we've got some objectives there. They've asked me to put out a whole load of use cases, which is a nice modern term, and I thought that was a good idea, so I've done that. And I don't want them to go through the phase that says, oh my God, this is just too hard for us. I don't want them to get there. So I thought that if I could get ahead of the curve, if I could engage some astronomical professionals, if I could engage some financial support, if I could engage some educators and get some support ready before the school began to realize how big this was, considering they just built a music centre, which is, I haven't got a photograph of this, but it's huge. I mean, huge and huge and huge, several times bigger than any observatory that you might build. We ought to be able to give them enough support and encouragement to build an observatory. The thing that's driving them a little bit is up until now, they've only had like 8 girls, it's a girls' school, they've only had like 8 girls interested in A-level physics. And this year, for the first time, they've got an enrollment of 25. And they feel that they need to do something about that. And I would agree with them, and I would encourage them with that. And I think it would be very exciting if we could encourage the next generation of female astrophysicists in this country. I wanted, so originally on this slide, I had a huge building site with cranes and everything, but I thought, well, maybe I don't want to scare them off. That would be the beginning of scaring them off. So I've avoided that, and I found an observatory. This is in North America somewhere. I would have liked it to look a little less run down, but maybe I'll find a better one for when I show them. So I want to reach out. You can see the steps here. Mobilizing the astronomy sector, get some technical specialists, and I think some of you guys may well be technical specialists. I'd like a fundraising team. I mean, we're all very good at picking up the telephone and hearing a voice at the other end saying, would you like to donate to the Cat's Home, or would you like to donate to some other worthy cause? And I want a little team like that to phone around from Benenden School and reach out to industry worthies who want to put down 10K or 20K or 15K just to contribute to this exercise. I would have thought the starting point is 50K, but I think 100. It's a 5-meter dome, so it's not standard pulsar-sized dome. It needs to be 5 meters, and I think the kicking off point for a 5-meter dome is about 50K. If we had 100K, then we'd have a bit of contingency. We could give it a second coat of paint. Maybe we could put a warm room on the side. I think it would just be nicer with 100K, and maybe we could, make the dome look a bit flasher. I want to mobilize the school. We have never, I've never concentrated on mobilizing the school before. We've talked to the head of science, or we've talked about to the extracurricular person, but we've never really focused on mobilizing the school and the parents. But that's what we do at work. When I'm at work and I'm doing I'm a consultant. When I'm at work, I focus as much on mobilizing the users and mobilize the business community as I do on fixing computers and other things that I do. And I think that I would like to see the same approach in this project. I think that in the longer term, it shouldn't just be for looking through. It shouldn't just be for doing research or having a school program through it. I think it should be about engaging parents. I think it should be about holding presentations. I think it should be about a much larger role within the school to support the whole school, as the music centre will be. The music centre, they'll have annual school concerts or termly school concerts. They'll probably have other events there. We should be looking for the observatory to have a fuller role within the school than just looking at telescopes through. Oh, look at that. And if we do get it right, I'd like to do it again. David thinks there are quite a lot of old telescopes out there looking for a home that no one really wants. I'd say give them to our kids. I think that I'm quite worried about the state of education in our schools, especially the state of science education. I remember when we were all children, well, I remember when I was a kid, and other people's parents used to give me old televisions, and I'd pull them apart and fix them and make them work. And this is that, isn't it? Giving a large school a telescope to make it work, do something exciting with. It's about encouraging children to be interested in the sciences. And I'd like to ask for your help.
Thank you very much. Do you have any questions for Steve? A question over here.
Yeah, sorry, one question. Sorry, finished.
Yeah.
In terms of getting children involved in astronomy and astrophysics, do you think it's better to have a physical telescope like that, or to give them access to remote telescopes?
I just feel personally, I feel much closer when I get my hands on it. In fact, I may not get the telescope actually working. So I've got a beautiful 8-inch Ritchie Gretchen with a roll-on, roll-off shed. I find it really hard to keep everything calibrated and aligned and electronically mobilized. And actually, I reach out to the other members of the club and I say, look, if you've got a nice photograph of Andromeda or M81 or something, and I take other people's photographs and process them and do whatever it is that I'm trying to do. But getting my hands dirty helps me to feel, getting my hands dirty helps me to feel much more really what the endeavour is. I can get my head round it more easily when I've also got my hands on it.
I would agree. There is nothing like hands-on contact with the equipment to understand the beauty of it and the mystery of it, of the universe.
A quick question. I'm not sure you said how big the Grubb telescope is in terms of sort of objective side.
Sorry, which one?
It's half a metre.
Yes, so the first one was 10 inches, which is, 250 millimetres. The second one at Worth was 400 millimetres, and this one is 500 millimetres. Oh, it's a nice size. And it's also got an attachment for fitting a spectrometer, should you so desire. Who can beat that?
Right, any more comments? Right, well, thank you very much, Stephen. And
Shall I turn it off? Yes.
right.
Thank you.
Hopefully something will come of that. At this time of year, we remember one of our famous members, George Alcock, 1912 to 2000, one of the most famous BAA observers, great visual observer, who discovered 5 comets and 4 novae. And we have the George Alcock Memorial Lecture every year in his honour. Today we have John Mason to give this lecture. John is one of the most familiar figures in the association, very well known through his TV appearances, so many of them with the late Patrick Moore. He's an expert on the small bodies of the solar system, and he's a past president of the association. He's been the public relations officer of the association for many years. He's been much involved with the South Downs Planetarium for about 30 years. He's been the main person running that in all that time. And on top of that, he's director of the BAA Meteor section. He's held that post since 2008. And his George Alcock Memorial Lecture will be on Alcock and Prentice, pioneers in meteor astronomy. John Mason. We'll have to swap over the connection.
Yes,
John, I'm just going to run it off a laptop.
I guess.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. Do we have a header slide? We do. Does it go forwards? It does. Does it go backwards? It does. Well, it's a great pleasure to give the George Alcock Memorial Lecture at BAA in my capacity as Meteor Section Director, because George was, as David said, one of the most famous members of the association, one of the most famous amateur astronomers. I think encompassing everything that is good about amateur astronomy and about the BAA. George, as we can see here, was born in 1912, died in 2000, and his interest in astronomy was triggered after seeing a partial eclipse on the 8th of April 1921. Those were fairly simple beginnings for someone who had become the greatest British visual discoverer of comets and novae, discovering 5 comets, and I've got 5 novae between 1959 and 1991, and I'm not including the outburst of RS Ophiuchi, but I think the Variable Stars Direction may correct me if I'm wrong. Am I correct or am I wrong?
All right.
Right. So this lovely plaque was unveiled at Peterborough Cathedral. This was a gift from the BAA, and it's a very fitting tribute to one of our greatest members. He's very well known for this latter part of his life between 1959 and 1991. But I want to concentrate on an earlier period in his life, a period that's very dear to my heart because it involves his very significant contribution to meteor astronomy. Now, the reason I became interested in astronomy overall was that one night, and I can tell you the date, it was the 30th of July 1961, God, I'm even older than that. On the 30th of July 1961, we came home very late. We'd been visiting an elderly aunt in London. We got lost as usual. So we arrived home at quite late, it must have been at 11:30, and I looked up and a brilliant meteor, possibly an early Perseid, I don't know, went across the sky, and that triggered my interest in astronomy. It was an almost identical event, I discovered, that triggered George's interest in astronomy. Now, you may wonder, what is a picture of a bridge got to do with George Alcock? Well, the answer is, this is 1930, this is the town bridge in Peterborough, and I'm reliably informed by their archives that this is the bridge that he walked over on the 30th of December 1930, when he saw a brilliant meteor brighter than Venus. And he was captivated by this. He was only 18 years old at the time. And it led him to make a very important decision. Because this single event led him to contact the then director of the BAA Meteor Section, John Philip Manning Prentice, JPM Prentice. Now, Prentice lived at Stowmarket, which was midway between Bury St Edmunds and Ipswich, and is about 60 miles from Peterborough, where George was. Now, at this stage, George wasn't actually a member of the BAA, but nonetheless, he wrote to the then Meteor Section Director. And this is JPM Prentice, one of the very few pictures of him that we have. Now, Prentice himself, you can see, became a BAA member at the age of only 16 in November 1919. And he directed the BAA Meteor Section for 31 years. And he is also the discoverer of the very famous slow nova, DQ Hercules, on the 13th of December 1934. And he discovered that nova during a meteor watch. Because this, as anyone who's a meteor observer will tell you, is the maximum of the Geminid meteor shower, 13th, 14th of December. And he'd been up observing most of the night And in the early hours of the morning, he started to feel his concentration was lapsing and he was missing meteors. So he thought, I'm going to get up, I'm going to walk around. And he walked around and he looked towards the northeast, towards Hercules, and he saw a star not far from the head of Draco that he didn't recognise. And he discovered a nova. A naked eye discovery, and a remarkable discovery. It turned out that DQ Hercules was a very atypical nova, as it happened. He made that discovery because his knowledge of the sky was incredible. Being a meteor observer in those days, a visual meteor observer, meant you had to have a really good knowledge of the sky to be able to record the details that were required. And JPM Prentice was very much in that level of expertise. Now remember, George had written to him with this observation of the very bright meteor he'd seen while walking across the town bridge in Peterborough. So, Prentice invited Alcock to come to a meteor section meeting and attend a meeting in Sion College on the Victoria Embankment. This is where a lot of BA meetings were held at that time. And George came along to that meeting in the library of Sion College. Now, at the very beginning of that meeting, they started with a minute's silence, because one of the most famous of all meteor observers had recently died, W.F. Denning. And so Alcock never met Denning, but Denning was going to have a very important role to play in what he would later do in terms of his meteor observing career. But he obviously went to this meeting, and all the main meteor observers of the time were there. And one of the people who was certainly there, who had her eye on George because she'd recognised that he was a talent in the making, great knowledge of the sky, very meticulous, would make a great observer. And the person concerned was Alice Grace Cook. Now, she was one of quite a number of lady members in the meteor sections in the early years. She was a stalwart of the meteor section, and she was, in fact, director of the section for a couple of years, from 1921 to 23, and it's likely that it was her who recommended JPM Prentice to take on as her successor. Now, Alice Grace Cook, who'd become a BA member in 1911, she also discovered, well, she was the first UK discoverer of the very fast nova V603 Aquilae on the 8th of June 1918. It was actually discovered elsewhere in the world, in India, I believe, but she was the first UK discoverer, again showing that a keen and dedicated meteor observer knew their sky and could recognise a new star when it appeared. Although in this case it was actually quite a bright nova as it happened. It's very likely that Alice Grace Cook didn't like the Alice, so we just called her Grace Cook. That's what she preferred. Grace Cook clearly spoke to both Prentice and Alcock at that meeting, where W.F. Denning had just died. And I think she recognised that there was a talent there in George Alcock, and she may well have been instrumental in bringing the two together, introducing them. They'd obviously written to each other, and a very long friendship was born. Now, I'm very pleased to see, firstly, that the government's building some new schools. That's the first thing I'm pleased about. Not in our area, but at least they are. They built one in Stowmarket, and they've named it after Grace Cook, which is a rather lovely thing to do. This is the school, and look at the school's logo. The Grace Cook Primary School has streaks of meteors going across the sky with some stars at the bottom. What a really nice thing to do. And I hope that that school may be one that takes up the challenge of educating young people in science for the future. But anyway, the Grace Cook Primary School in Stowmarket. So we have Denning's died. Grace Cook has been the catalyst, if you like, in bringing Prentice and Alcock together at that meeting at Sion college. But let's think for a moment about the man who had just died, W.F. Denning. He was only director of the BAA Meteor section for 1 year, from 1899 to 1900. And apparently when he quit, he gave up on the grounds of ill health, but nobody had the foggiest idea what was wrong with him. In fact, he displayed no indication of having anything wrong with him at all. But he was the director for 1 year. But his contribution to meteor science was absolutely enormous. Now, Denning was born much earlier, in 1848, died in 1931. He became a BAA member in 1898, 8 years after BAA was founded, and as I say, he was director of the meteor section for just 1 year. He's well known for his catalogues of meteor radiance, and also he was a discoverer of 5 comets and a 3rd magnitude nova in Cygnus. In fact, the final one of his comet discoveries was the last comet discovery to be made in the United Kingdom until George Alcock made his first comet discovery in 1959, Comet Alcock. So there is a link between all these people. Denning's catalogues of meteor radiance were published and were used worldwide. And Denning made a number of outstanding contributions to meteor science. But like very often happens in science, you're not often always remembered for the good you did, but for maybe the one thing you got wrong. And that is sadly possibly the case with William Frederick Denning. Incredible contribution to meteor science, meteor physics at the time, but he got one thing wrong. And what I've never been able to understand is why he stuck so hard all of his life to an idea that was patently ill-advised. In 1877, Denning provided the first clear-cut evidence that the meteor radiant of the Perseid shower shifted at roughly a degree night on night due to the Earth's motion round the sun. Now, this is no great surprise to us today. This is what we expect. It was Giovanni Schiaparelli who showed that the Perseids were connected with comet P Swift-Tuttle. And with a periodic comet, albeit in a retrograde orbit, there will be a time when the Earth is approaching the orbit of that comet, ploughing through the stream, and as the Earth moves through the stream, so the radiant of the stream will shift. Now, Denning made this discovery, and it was a very important discovery, and he is rightfully applauded for making this discovery. You can see there this lovely picture by Pete Lawrence of the Perseid radiant there at the top. But then he went and made an idea that really consumed him for the rest of his scientific life, which was another 54 years. And he would not drop this idea, no matter all the evidence that came in to show him it was wrong. This was the idea of stationary meteor radiance. Now bear in mind, he'd measured the movement of the Perseid radiant, an incredible contribution. But he suggested, based on his observations over the years, that some meteor radiants were in fact stationary in the sky. Now this was an entirely new concept, but very controversial, because the stationary radiant hypothesis was massively problematic, seeing as it could not be made to fit with the idea that it was periodic comets and the orbits of those comets where the dust was confined that gave rise to the major meteor showers of the year. And you couldn't make that idea for the origin of meteoroid streams fit with Denning's idea that there were stationary radiants. And the issue of whether or not stationary radiants actually existed took many, many years to resolve. And it was because of Denning's incredible standing in the field that people didn't like to challenge it. But challenge it was, but not by someone in the United Kingdom. Denning firmly believed in stationary meteor radiance right up to his death in 1931. And indeed, early observations by members of the Meteor section appeared to confirm Denning's view in certain cases. Here is an extract from the BAA Journal for March 1922. And it's a report on observations of meteors from the Epsilon Ariated stream, which we'd now probably connect with the Taurid meteor complex in October time. And basically, this paper by Grace Cook and Prentice reported on observations of the Epsilon Ariated radiant over a period of years. And here we can see the observations they've made, and you can see that from July right the way through to the end of December, this radiant appears to be fixed. It's interesting, though, that a lot of the dates are clustered around towards the end of October into November, the time that we would now associate with the Taurid meteor complex associated with Comet Encke. But the observations in July and August and early September and those in December were problematic. But the radiant position appears to be stationary throughout that period. They appeared to have confirmed Denning's idea, at least for this one shower. Now, it's a problem because we can see here, there's the sun in the middle, there's the Earth's orbit, and there we have the orbit of a periodic comet, and we have the comet over many returns to perihelion, strewing dust around the orbit. And so we get an orbit of dust, an elliptical concentration of dust grains, definitely more concentrated near the comet's perihelion and less dense near the aphelion, but all the way round the comet's orbit there will be dust. And it takes many, many orbits of the periodic comet to build up that loop of dust around the orbit. Now, depending on the inclination of the comet's orbit to the plane of Earth's orbit round the sun, as we can see in that diagram there, we can see that here the comet's orbit is steeply inclined, and there's one intersection point there, and that is where we would expect to see the stream as the Earth, moving anti-clockwise as moved from above, passes close to, closest and away from the comet's orbit where the dust is located. Bear in mind that the dust grains around the comet's orbit will have orbits very similar to, but not exactly identical to the orbit of the parent comet. And as the parent comet goes round the sun and its orbit evolves, the orbits of the meteoroid streams will also evolve. And so once a comet's been round the sun many dozens of times, you will get filaments of dust that have definite separate orbital elements to the others because they've been laid down at different times and planetary perturbations have had an effect on them for different times. But nonetheless, we will still find, even with that spread, that the radiance will be distributed over an area, and, moreover, that they won't be there for a period of 6 months. There is no way that the stationary radiant theory can fit with this hypothesis for how meteoroid streams are formed and evolve. Charles Pollard Olivier, American meteor observer extraordinaire. He was the W.F. Denning of America. He founded the American Meteor Society in 1911. And along with W.F. Denning, he pioneered the scientific study of visual meteors. Now, he completed his PhD in 1911, the year he founded the American Meteor Society, and it's very interesting in the subject of his PhD dissertation. It was in disproving the existence of stationary meteor radiance. He'd looked at the models, he'd looked at the ways dust was laid down, and he'd shown that in his dissertation that stationary radiance just were not possible. So would he get involved in the stationary radiant debate? And would that debate even reach the BAA in London? Yes, it most certainly would, because Olivier wrote to the journal and he analysed all of those individual radiants that Grace Cook and Manning Prentice had produced in their previous paper for the Epsilon Arietids, and he thought, okay, if these are all coming from the same stream over that 6-month period, what is the shape of the stream? Now, the circle is the Earth's orbit, and the other shape is the shape of the meteoroid stream that would be needed if all of those radiants in that Epsilon Arietid paper were from the same filament of dust. The perihelion of this particular bit of the orbit is actually inside the Sun. And you can see the bizarre shape that is produced. Let's see what Olivier had to say at the end of his paper. And he starts off by congratulating Grace Cook and Manning Prentice on their dedication, on observing all of these meteors. And then this is what he goes on to say. The records of the American Meteor Society include tables of 1,200 radiants based on 31,000 meteors over 20 years, but only 6 radiants are found within 5 degrees of the assumed fixed point. But no member of the American Meteor Society had any particular expectation of finding a radiant near Epsilon Arietidis. Remember, it was Denning who proposed there was a radiant there. So they never made any special meteor watches to look for a radiant in that region. So they didn't make special watches, but it meant there was no observer's bias because they weren't looking for a radiant in that region. It must therefore be said that the very extensive records of the American Meteor Society lend practically no support to the hypothesis of a stationary radiant in the position under consideration. It is therefore concluded, first, the authors should furnish more complete data in order their results can be examined critically. Second, that the practical and theoretical reasons against the existence of such a thick radiant seem almost insuperable. And third, in any case, before their conclusions can be unreservedly accepted, this radiant should be independently investigated and proved to exist by other observers. It's interesting that the BAA journal has published this nice analysis by Olivier, but basically shooting a few small holes in the theory of the stationary meteor radiant idea. Now, for most of Denning's tenure, all the years of the early BA work, the work of Denning, which started long before the BA was founded, was very much rooted in the techniques he had schooled people. And even up to the 1920s, people were still using those methods. And in general, it meant plotting the tracks on a mnemonic projection chart, like this one. You can see all the arrows. And then projecting them back to what would be the radiant point. So you can see the little circle there to the left. That's the radiant. And when you've got a really major shower like this, it's fairly obvious where the radiant is. But it's not so obvious when you don't have so many meteors. So you're going to take the trails back and you're going to say, well, okay, where's the radiant for this? Possibly somewhere in the middle, maybe? Maybe not. Which ones are members of the shower and which ones aren't? So when you have not very high numbers, chance alignments of a meteor with a radiant that you put forward is actually a lot more likely than you think. And when you do the statistics, you find that actually it's quite easy when you've got small numbers of meteors to actually think you've found a radiant where there isn't one, or that a radiant exists in a stationary position when it doesn't. Now, Prentice obviously had read Olivier's critique of the paper he published with Grace Cook. And he was obviously thinking very carefully about the techniques that he'd been weaned on, that when he became Meteor Section Director, succeeding Grace Cook, he was in a position to do something about it. Was he going to stick with the tried and tested methods of Denning, or was he going to try and come up with something better? And that's exactly what he decided to do. Because quite early on in his directorship, Denning's methods were clearly found wanting. And Prentice decided that we needed a new method of recording meteor paths if we were to try and really pin down where these radiants were. Prentice wanted to look at the idea of stationary radiants and really investigate it thoroughly and rigorously. And this meant greater accuracy in the determination of radiant points. And so he came up with a new method, but it required at least 2 very dedicated observers, required to make long watches, to have a clear sky at both stations, and to be around about 100 kilometres, 60 miles apart, which is a pretty much ideal separation if you're going to do what's known as meteor triangulation, which is to get the same meteor observed from the same 2 locations, but seeing it in different parts of the sky, and then use the measurements of the positions in the sky to work out the actual path through the atmosphere. When 2 observers saw the same meteor at the same time, albeit in different parts of the sky, this was dubbed by Prentice to be an accordance. And he was trying to maximise the accordances that were recorded. And so, he had a very willing co-observer in George Alcock, a man as meticulous, as dedicated as he was, someone who also had the constitution of an insomniac polar bear, who could go outside in incredibly cold weather and would be able to do long watches, because that's what required. To get enough accordances, that's what you need. And so the partnership of Prentice and Alcock began. And it went on for about 20 years. And during that 20 years, although there were other observers in the meteor section who contributed, if you look at the really detailed, rigorous work that went on, it's the initials GDA and JPMP that crop up against nearly all the major watches. Here you can see the principle of 2-station meteor triangulation. You have an observer here, say in Stowmarket, an observer over on the left there, say in Peterborough. This is the greatest displacement you'd expect when the meteor trail goes between the 2 stations. And so this observer here will see it obviously in that part of the sky, where the observer there will see it in this part of the sky. So you need accurate timing, and you need accurate fixing of the path. Now, Prentice realised that one of the key things was to get the alignment of the trail right. Because if you got the alignment right, you could get the start and end point along that line. So they would have a long 5-foot thin stick that they would hold up at the sky along the trail. Get the alignment so you know the line in the sky, and then pick out the start and end point along that line. Because that way, you're going to get the best chance of getting an accurate radiant determination. Now, this is, it's sad that of the vast amount of material left to us in the Meteor Section archive by Prentice and by Alcock, and they are astonishingly detailed records, they have faded quite dramatically. And it's very, very hard to reproduce them. This was one of the best records that I managed to do. And you can see the detail that you are recording. GMAT is Greenwich Mean Astronomical Time, which starts at midday, at noon. And the reason you use this was that you didn't have to remember to change the date at midnight. So if you used GMAT, you started observing, say, at 6 hours, 1800 to us, and you went through till another 12 hours, 18 hours, which would be 6 o'clock the following morning. But you didn't have to change the date at midnight. There is a wealth of data recorded. And over the years, Prentice and Alcock perfected their technique. And they are trying to get these accordances. And Alcock would make these beautifully written and presented observing records. And he would then send them to Prentice. Prentice would then do the analysis to work out the accordances and would communicate back to George. I wonder how long you think this took? A further means of rendering the meteor observing sessions more effective was the express delivery service offered by the post office. A private telephone was well enough a luxury beyond the means of the Alcock family. The morning after a clear night at Peterborough, George would send a postcard from the city's main post office to Manning Prentice. He'd give him details of the night's watch, plus any weather forecasts for the next 2 nights. The postcard would go by train to reach Stowmarket by midday the same day. The station master would then ring Manning's office to say the postcard and details had arrived for collection. Any reply would be put on the 2 p.m. train the same day and delivered to George by telegraph boy less than 3 hours after he'd put it on the first train. The cost of this exemplary service was the usual delivery charge per 6pence, an extra 2.5p. So it is remarkable when you consider how these two corresponded, and when you look at the letters sometimes of several pages that they wrote to each other, and wrote and sent off and were received and responded to and replied to. It is one of the most, I think, astonishing partnerships in British observational history. Now, the proof of the pudding is, does all this incredible meticulous work, does it actually result in an improvement in the accuracy of the observations and the radiant determinations? Well, the person to look at this was none other than Guy Porter, another leading BAA member. And Guy Porter analysed observations of Prentice and Alcock, and he presented an analysis of the results at a BAA meeting in 1938. And this is the summary written by Bernard Lovell that I have reproduced. So 102 meteor paths observed simultaneously but independently by Prentice and Alcock. These were accordances, the same meteor seen by two stations. The error was 3.26 degrees for the beginning of a trail, 2.43 for the end. Less for the end because you're more likely to see it accurately at the end than when you just suddenly look and the start has maybe just caught you unawares. He analysed the data for 1,253 meteor paths, 725 observed simultaneously by Prentice and other members, but mostly by Alcock, over an 8-year period. He found the standard deviation in the directions for the beginning and end of the path to be 3.19, 3.16 degrees. And the offset errors perpendicular to the path were just under a degree and just over a degree. So really, really accurate work. He found that the timing errors were the most serious. Now, we're not talking the time that the meteor occurred. We're talking, the idea was, when they first saw the meteor, they'd start a stopwatch, and when they ended it, they stopped the stopwatch. Now, if any of you have meteor observed, you'll know it's a lot less than a second, often less than half a second, and it's little wonder that the timings were 20 to 30% out. They use these timings to try and get an idea for the angular velocity of the meteor. Because with an accordance, if you've got a very swift meteor, they both will see it as very swift, or a very slow meteor, they'll both see it as very slow. So this was an important way of trying to match meteor trails up. But Porter showed that it was the timing of the speed that was the most inaccurate of all the things. This accurate work, the skill and determination which they brought to the task, was really, really important. But it was the joint work between Prentice and Alcock that was the most important. Now, Guy Porter presented this analysis at the BAA meeting in 1938. And who was sitting in the audience but none other than George Alcock? And Guy Porter made a comment about some of the observations it's analysed that George took issue with. And this is his reply. This is in the meeting record. Mr. Alcock, it is very gratifying for all meteor observers to find out that their results are not too bad at all. I should like to thank Mr. Porter for going to so much trouble to analyse the results so carefully, for I know what a difficult piece of work this must have been. Mr. Porter says that our errors are due to carelessness. Well, I should like to correct that perhaps I should follow Mr. Prentice in calling it more forgetfulness. The average meteor only lasts for about half a second, and there are about 10 different bits of information to be memorised and written down for each trail. These are the exact time, the apparent magnitude, and any visible variation in such, the weight or quality of the observation, 3 points of alignment to obtain the direction of flight, the position of the beginning and end of the visible path, and any special points concerning colour, streak, or persistent train. In the case of a bright meteor, the position of the streak is noted, and if of long duration, its drift in the upper atmosphere, and any points about the path where explosions occur. When observing a shower such as the Perseids, with an hourly rate of perhaps 60, it is difficult to remember everything precisely. What a wonderful response, what a wonderful piece. Exchanges at these meetings that you read in these wonderful accounts in the journal are really lovely. The work that Prentice and Alcock did was demonstrated, and the precision of it, because they decided to tackle one of Denning's stationary radiants, that of the Orionids of October. a shower connected with Halley's Comet. Halley's Comet produces two meteoroid showers, the Acorrids at the beginning of May and the Orionids in October. And this fantastic picture by Phil Hart in Australia is of the Orionids composite in 2011. And you can see actually the radiant is quite some way above the main pattern of Orion, right on the border with Gemini, in fact. So Prentice and Alcock set to observing the Orionid shower over several years. And the paper was published. So you can see here, it's not one of the richer streams, it certainly isn't, and they obtain radiance and they observe, as you can see here, 1928, 1930, 1931, 1932. In 1929, there was a full moon right close to the radiant. So there's basically 4 years of observations, of accordances, and they have shown the radiant drift beautifully, and you can see the data points for different years. They showed that the Orionid stream does have more than one centre of radiation. There are a number of substreams. Remember, Halley's Comet is an extremely old comet, and its orbit has evolved over the years. And this means that streams laid down at different perihelion passage every 75, 76, 77 years have moved apart from the others. And so it's very likely that there will be multiple stream centres. What Prentice and Alcock have shown here is that their observations were sufficiently accurate to not only identify these substreams, but to show the drift of the radiant exactly as expected. They had shot a massive hole in Denning's stationary radiant idea. It's interesting, you'll notice that this is published in 1933, 2 years after Denning died. So they have shown that the stationary radiant hypothesis is dead. Now, Prentice made another very significant contribution to meteor science. He confirmed the link between the periodic comet that we would now call Jacobini-Zinner with the Draconid or Jacobinid meteor shower. Now, there's another BAA member, the Reverend Martin Davidson, who predicted that a shower of meteors might well be expected by this comet, discovered independently by Jacobini and Zinner, and it passed close to the orbit of the Earth. And no such meteors were observed for 11 years after the Reverend Davidson's prediction. But then, on the 9th of October 1926, Prentice saw and recorded a number of meteors coming from a radiant in the northwest sky, which on plotting their paths was very close to the predicted radiant by Dr. Davidson. The link between the comet and the meteor shower had been proven, and it was Prentice's observations that had done that. But few people were prepared for what was going to happen on the 9th of October 1933, one of the greatest meteor storms of that century. You can see here, these are observations made that Prentice collected, and you can see they were published by Bernard Lovell in his book. You can see the hourly rate per minute goes up to about 100 meteors per minute. That's 6,000 meteors per hour. The peak was at around about 2020. One of the people, the UK was extremely cloudy. In fact, Prentice himself was clouded out for this storm in Stowmarket, and he collected observations from all over Europe to publish this material. George Alcock was also not observing at the time, but his mother saw the storm waiting from a bus stop. I can imagine the conversation in the Alcock household when she got home. Did you see that great shower of meteors? What shower of meteors? Oh, it's very, very good. I watched it from the bus stop. So George did not see the 1933 storm, nor did Prentice. But the link between the shower and the comet was definitely proven. There is a wonderful account by the Reverend Ellison, who lived in Northern Ireland, who had incredibly clear skies. And he started watching the shower at around about 7 o'clock. And it was clearly pretty impressive. Anyway, after he's been watching for about a half an hour, on his report he says, called in to dinner. Came out an hour later, and it was clearly a great storm was in progress. When I told this to my wife, she said, if I'd come out and said, dinner's ready, dear, and you were about to watch this, I know what response I would have got. But things were different in those days, quite clearly. So the rates were rising incredibly rapidly at that time. So that's the great Jacobinid storm of 1933. There was another storm in 1946. This one occurred just before dawn from the United Kingdom. And George Alcock again missed it because he was starting a new teaching job the following morning, and so he went to bed what for him was early, just before the storm occurred. This was the first meteor storm observed not only visually, but photographically and by the new meteor science of radio. And this was an indication to Prentice that radio observations may be the future, because observations of visual observers were badly affected by cloud and weather, whereas the radio observations could continue throughout. And this is the beginning of his idea that, in fact, radio was the future. We can see here from the work of Jérôme Vaubillon that we went through a number of particular filaments laid down by the comet, both in 1933 and again in 1946, which caused those great storms. The work on the quadrantids was also very important. This is a shower that occurs in the first few days of January. It's extremely cold, the nights are long and dark, but the weather is generally very inclement. But nonetheless, over many years, Prentice and Alcock wrapped up observations enabling to show when the peak of the shower occurred, and to show that it was a very narrow peak with a full width at half maximum of less than a day, but that it was one of the most active meteor showers of the year. You can see here, these are observations between 1921 to 22 and 1923 to 1940. They were also able to show that there had been a drift in the time of maximum over the period of time that the shower had been observed. Now, obviously, this graph goes right up to 1980, but some of Prentice's work there in the Middle Age, you see the big dots there between 1900 and 1920-something. Here we've got the observations, the paper that they published in the journal. Look at the initials. These were the observers. It was fitting that the very last meteor watch that George Alcock ever made, because by the early 50s, both Alcock and Prentice were realising that maybe more modern techniques were taking over from what they were doing, and they both gave up to do other things. George, of course, took up a very successful career in looking for comets and novae. But the very last meteor watch that George Alcock made was of the quadrantids in January, 10 hours, 48 minutes observing. An incredible career. Harold Ridley, Meteor Section Director, took over from Prentice with Alcock. It took Alcock and Prentice 20 years to get one good night of accordance work on the quadrantid shower because of the weather. But now we have video meteor camera systems. I'm very grateful to Alex Pratt and William Stewart, the Nematode Network, to give me a few results of the quadrantids. So this is a ground plot of 688 multiple station quadrantids obtained between 2014 and 2023. So a new way of recording atmospheric paths and radiance far in excess of anything that Prentice could have dreamed of. In fact, one of the complications with the quadrantids is that there is another shower, the December alpha draconids, that have a radiant very similar to where the quadrantids will occur, but they are active during December, leading in to the quadrantid period of activity. And here we can see a plot of nematode data, 2012-2019, of December alpha draconids up here in green, and the radiance of the quadrantids. You can see the radiance of the quadrantids much more concentrated, those of the December alpha draconids more spread. And we can do things like the drift of the radiant night on night. Here we've got the drift in right ascension for the December alpha draconids on the left in green, and the quadrantids above in red. And you can see that the right ascensions are very similar. We can do a similar piece of work here for the radiant drift in declination, again for the December alpha draconids on the left and the quadrantids here. Work that would have taken many, perhaps decades, using the techniques of Prentice and Alcock, now in a few years. And this ecliptic plot, this is only major showers, there are no minor streams or sporadics here, and you can see the major showers on this plot. We've got the Perseids, J5 Perseids there, we've got the radiant movement there. You can see various other showers, the Geminids there, the northern and southern Taurids. You can see those two green parallel lines, they go on right the way through October and November. So yes, the shower does go on for a couple of months, but the radiant is drifting at the appropriate rate, not as Denning had surmised. So modern methods have caused a sea change again in the way we assess the radiance and the paths of these showers. But we must not forget, with all this technology, the work of those incredibly dedicated observers, particularly JPM Prentice and George Alcock, and their partnership, which I would say is probably second to none in the case of Meteor work. I'd like to thank all of these people who helped me in putting this collection of material together. There's a great deal more to be done on the work of these two, much of which was never published. As I say, a lot of the observations are very faint and very hard to see now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. Fantastic talk, as always. We've got time for one or two questions. If anybody has any questions for John. And on Zoom, there's people watching, not Zoom, but YouTube. We've got 7 watching, and you can type questions in the chat if anybody wants to. Anybody watching the YouTube stream wants to ask anything. Otherwise, we will say thank you again for another inimitable performance by the great John Mason. Our next speaker is Jeremy Shears. Jeremy is director of the BAA Variable Star section. He's also our paper secretary, and he's also a past president. He's particularly interested in dwarf novae, but he also observes meteors and comets and the sun at different times, obviously. And he's written many journal papers on distinguished past members of the association. And today, the title of his talk is Get Set for the Next Eruption of the Recurrent Nova T. Coronae Borealis. Jeremy.
Right, thank you very much, Mr. President, for the very kind introduction. So, some of the most impressive astronomical events are, of course, entirely predictable. I can say with some confidence that on April the 8th next year, the shadow of the moon will pass across parts of Mexico and a large part of the United States of America. In fact, so certain and confident am I about that, that I've already booked my flights and accommodation. There are also other things that are predictable, perhaps with slightly less precision, but we've heard in the previous talk about how it's possible to predict the main meteor showers, but even outbursts or really splendid events associated with some of those meteor showers, because we've been capable of modelling the meteoroid stream in space. So there's fair certainty there. Other things less certain, so novae. Tonight we're going to talk about novae. So mankind has enjoyed seeing novae in the night sky. Maybe not enjoyed, maybe sometimes fearful, wondering what's happening. But since, well, prehistoric times, one assumes. And there can be very few things in the sky that are more exciting than a bright nova appearing. But can they be predicted? Well, I think you're aware that most novae just suddenly appear. But there is a group of novae called the recurrent novae. The clue's in the name. They occur more than once. It's actually thought that all novae will actually recur on some time scale. It may be hundreds of years, it may be thousands or even tens of thousands of years. But there is this group that are known to recur called the recurrent novae. So tonight I want to look at one of those recurrent novae in particular. This is T. Coronae Borealis. And this has been known to have two outbursts, two eruptions, one in 1866 and the second in 1946. And the difference of 80 years between those suggests that maybe another one is coming up in the near future. In fact, since I was a small boy, I looked forward to three events in the future. One was the appearance of Halley's Comet. That's okay. The other was the 1999 total eclipse of the sun, which I was clouded out for in Devon. But I also heard about 2026, the return of T. Coronae Borealis. So I'll then go on to talk in a few minutes later about when will that next eruption occur. We'll look at some predictions and understand how certain or uncertain those predictions may or may not be. And then finally, we'll look at how we can observe T. Coronae Borealis, maybe tonight, certainly over the next few weeks and months, leading up to this eruption that is predicted. So there are 10 of these recurrent novae, and in fact 2 of those have been in eruption very recently. Last year we enjoyed the eruption of New Scorpii, a southern recurrent nova. Its first for 11 years, and the 9th on record. So quite a few of these have been observed, many more than T. Coronae Borealis. Splendid image here taken by Mazin Yunus using his remote telescope in Morocco. And as you can see from the light curve, it's a very fast nova. It appears and disappears within a few days. The year before, we were treated to another recurrent nova going to outburst. That's RS Ophiuchi. And this occurred in August of 2021, and it was a fine period of weather in late August. And I remember observing this on many nights, initially with binoculars. But once again, it fades very quickly. So with most of these recurrent novae, you have to have clear weather in the few days when they're around. Again, another lovely image by Mazin. This is three days apart, and you can see as the nova becomes a bit fainter, it becomes a bit redder. This was actually the first for 16 years and the 8th on record. And what I don't want you to conclude from this is that these occur like clockwork. In fact, for these two recurrent novae, the period ranges by a factor of 2 to 3. So it's very difficult to predict when the next eruption will be with any great degree of certainty. So now let's look at the story of Coronae Borealis and its first eruption back in 1866. It was discovered by this gentleman here, John Birmingham. John was a resident of Galway in the west of Ireland. He was a landlord. He owned quite a lot of property in the region. That was the main source of his income. And he used that income, particularly in the 1850s, to travel around Europe on a kind of grand tour. It's a bit of an older person's gap year, if you like, maybe several years. He was obviously mature by this age. And he learned lots of things, in particular about astronomy. He visited Berlin and spent quite a lot of time there. And he was known in the area as an amateur astronomer, somebody that was very interested in science and astronomy in particular. He actually wrote a column in the local newspaper, and he referred to geological discoveries, astronomical discoveries, and such like. Now, on the night of the 12th of May 1866, John was returning home late in the evening. It was about 11:30 that night, and he was glancing around the sky, and he saw this bright star. The bright star turned out to be Coronae Borealis. He wasn't specifically looking for it. He wasn't even on an observing evening. As an amateur astronomer, he did have a small telescope, so he did observe the night sky regularly, but this time he was nearly returning home. And he actually caught it at magnitude 2, which turns out to be the peak of the eruption, so he was really fortuitous. It was even more fortuitous than that, because it's known that there was an observation only 2.5 hours before made by Julius Schmidt at the Athens Observatory of this area where nothing was seen, at least nothing bright was seen. So it was right at the beginning of the nova eruption. Once again, it's a very fast nova. It faded 3 magnitudes in 5 days. It's again, blink and you miss it. So he thought, well, how do I report and get information out to the outside world about this discovery? So he wrote a letter to the Times, and he posted it, and then he got the Times the next couple of mornings. There was no letter in the Times. And you thought, hang on a moment, I wonder what's happened. And he formulated this idea in his mind of the editor, the sub-editor at the Times, opening the letter from an unknown person in the west of Ireland, saying he's discovered a bright star in the sky, and he assumed it had gone into the waste paper basket. So at that point he said, well, who else can I send it to? And he decided not to send it to the Royal Greenwich Observatory, but he sent it to William Huggins. Now, William Huggins was a pioneer of spectroscopy, and he had an observatory in South London at Tulse Hill, and he was just beginning to make a name for himself in the emerging field of spectroscopy. So Birmingham wrote to Tulse Hill, and the letter arrived. So Huggins opened the letter, but in the same postal delivery there was another announcement from an independent discoverer. It was Joseph Baxendale. Joseph was a very enthusiastic variable star observer based in Manchester. There are better places to be a variable star observer than Manchester. Nonetheless, he did have an independent discovery 3 nights after Birmingham had made his discovery. But it made Huggins sit up and take notice. In fact, 2 reports came in at once. And that evening, it was clear in Tulse Hill. So Huggins went out to his spectrograph, and took a spectrum. And this turned out to be the first spectrum recorded of any nova. And it was remarkable. He said it was like a star on fire. He presented his results the next day at the meeting of the Royal Astronomical Society. So this is really hot off the press stuff. And in that meeting, he said it was John Birmingham that discovered it. So there's no doubt about that. He described the light of this new star formed a spectrum unlike that of any celestial body. And here's a drawing of the spectrum, and it was unusual to say the least. And it was unusual because it had both bright bands and dark bands, so emission bands and absorption bands. And Huggins thought about that, and he concluded correctly, as it turned out, that this was caused by a very hot gas. So there was some of the gas molecules were emitting light, and some of the molecules were absorbing light. So it's a complex spectrum, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. So this actually launched John Birmingham on a new career, and he spent a huge amount of money. He travelled to relations in Yorkshire, and he was close to the Cook telescope factory, and there he bought a 4.5-inch Cook refractor, which is still in existence in the local museum. And he began to observe the stars, and like many of us do, he looked at all the fine objects and then thought, well, what can I do that will be useful? And he sought advice from one of the greatest amateur astronomers of the time, Thomas Webb. And Webb said, well, why don't you study red stars? And that's what he did. So he used a telescope night after night, looking at red stars, cataloguing them, measuring the brightness, the position, etc. And he was able to produce this catalogue of 658 stars, which he presented to the Royal Irish Academy. It was very well received, and it led to him being awarded their most prestigious medal, which is the Cunningham Gold Medal by the Royal Irish Academy. And this list was later extended by another BAA stalwart, T. Espin of Towlor in County Durham. So we now want to go on to Birmingham's stars. So I'm not here referring to Ozzy Osbourne or even Noddy Holder, and neither am I referring to Gary Poyner, one of our greatest variable star observers, but I'm referring to V Cygni, which Gary actually told me a couple of days ago was probably the reddest object that he had observed through a telescope. The V Cygni was called Birmingham star. It's a Mira-type variable, so it's a large star that's sort of pulsating around, and that's why you get these variations in the light curve. And it's an absolutely beautiful light curve because there's so many variations, and those variations are caused by different periodicities in the pulsations of the Mira star. You can see little dips in the rise and fall, as you often see in Mira stars, but you also see this much slower pulsation going through the whole light curve there. And as you can see in a photograph here taken, or an image taken by Mike Foylan, it is indeed a very orange or crimson star. So let's move forward a little bit into the 20th century. I'm sure many of you, in fact I would hope all of you, have read the books that are shown here, which are Starlight Nights by, some people call him the American George Alcock, so a great discoverer of comets, Leslie Peltier. If you haven't read this book, I implore you to do so, because he describes the love of astronomy, so why we love doing what we're doing. It's not a technical book at all. But Leslie Peltier got it in his mind that perhaps some novae in the past might actually reappear. So he drew up a list. He had no evidence or reason for thinking that. He said, well, if they got off once, perhaps they happen again. So he made a list of these, and they included some old novae, but also some old supernovae. Of course, he didn't know the difference between those at the time. And he began to observe these stars and follow them every night. And one of those stars was T. Coronae Borealis. And he followed it for around 25 years, pretty much every clear night. And in 1945, he noticed that the star was beginning to fade. And he thought, oh, this is unusual. Perhaps this is a sign of the next eruption, which seemed curious. You might expect it to brighten before the next eruption. But that's what he thought. And a notice was sent out by the Harvard College Observatory, alerting people to the fact that this might happen. Of course, Peltier kept observing, and on the fateful morning that it did erupt, He'd set his alarm for 2:30 that morning. Frosty morning in February. He got up, he looked out, and he saw that it was a completely clear sky. And then he coughed and sneezed, and he thought, I have a cold coming on. I owe it to my family to go back to bed. Now, how many of you have not actually had a similar thought, even at 2:30 on a February morning? So he went back to bed, and he missed this eruption. And he comments in the book that he continued to observe this star for the rest of his life. It never went into eruption. But he always kept a wary eye on it, as he said. The eruption was detected by 3 people independently. If you read most papers, the eruption is credited to the gentleman on the right, Armin Deutsch, who was a graduate student at the Yerkes Observatory. And that morning, he was, on February the 9th, he was due to have an observing run on the Yerkes telescope, but he was looking around the sky, he had binoculars, and he saw T. Coronae Borealis. He didn't need the 40-inch Yerkes telescope to discover this star. It was around third magnitude. Well, actually, there is at least one other co-discoverer, and that is this gentleman here on the left called Norman Knight. Norman was a BAA member, and he was an observer for many years in the variable star section. And he actually observed this, he spotted T. Coronae Borealis using a small handheld telescope before Armin Deutsch saw it. And therefore, he should be credited as well. And in many sources, he is credited with that. So it's remarkable. It was actually discovered not too far away from here in Chiswick. Now, by the time this was discussed at the BAA meeting that followed, and that's the paper that was presented at the time, it came to light, and I've only seen this mentioned once, but it's mentioned in the BAA journal, that it was also discovered by an M. Woodman, a 15-year-old person, I think he was a boy, in Newport in Wales. I haven't found any other reference to that, but so it certainly wasn't Armin Deutsch that discovered it. So the 1946 light curve is shown here, very fast nova again. We missed the peak. The peak occurred before Knight and Deutsch discovered the eruption, and it faded 3 magnitudes in 5 days. And it went back to quiescence level, the level it pretty much was before the eruption. And then remarkably, it re-brightened, and there was a secondary eruption. And that secondary eruption occurred after 80 days at quiescence, and it lasted 90 days. And I'd love to see the names of the variable star section observers listed at the bottom there. There's real stalwarts there. W.H. Stevenson, Henry Wilde, there's Knight himself, F.M. Holden. The list is quite short, or shorter than it might otherwise be, because many variable star section observers were still away on active service at this time. So let's have a look at what this object is. What is this recurrent nova? And it's actually, like all novae, it's a double star, it's a binary star. And the components are worth considering. So this artist's impression here shows the bright little star. That's the white dwarf. There's a white dwarf there which has a high gravitational potential. And here, just by me here, is a red giant. And this is unusual for novae, and it's actually called, because it's a red giant as opposed to a red dwarf, this is actually called a symbiotic nova. So we've got the red giant here, and because of the high gravitational pull of the white dwarf, it's drawing material off the red giant, and it forms that sort of dusty disk around the white dwarf, and that's where a lot of the action happens. So I'm going to show you a video that sort of moves around this quite complex system. Before I do that, I want to draw your attention to another thing. Surrounding both stars is this envelope, this gaseous envelope. You can see the fuzzy stuff there. And that's going to be important later in the talk. So that's what that's what's going on. The distance between the two stars is around half an astronomical unit, so half the distance between the Earth and the Sun. So let's have a look at the... So we start off behind the red giant. You'll be able to see the white dwarf in a moment. You see this accretion disk, the matter spinning around and being this is the accretion disk going around the white dwarf. Material going onto it. There's the entire double star system surrounded by the gas. And at a certain point, and it was that point there, sufficient material lands on the surface of the white dwarf that is so dense that it causes a thermonuclear runaway reaction. That's what causes the reaction. That's the energy source for the eruption of the nova. Now, when the eruption happens, a lot of gas is displaced and spread out into space, and you often get remnants left, or nova shells. There has been a report of one being detected around Coronae Borealis, but I don't think it's a particularly prominent one, unlike the one around another nova, GK Persei, where you can see on the left image the star surrounded by the gaseous cloud. And here you can see a time lapse of that cloud expanding over time. The thing to note, in that eruption, Meteor is put into space, but it's a relatively small amount of material. So it's not that the whole thing is destroyed, and that's the reason why these things can recur. Now, there's been a paper published earlier this year by a researcher in the United States called Brad Schaefer, and he's done a terrific job looking at all the observations of Coronae Borealis that are in the records, either in databases or in papers, and he's calibrated these onto the same scale. And forget the blue points for a moment. Just look at the green points, which are the light curves of the 1946 and the 1866 eruption. And within the allowed errors, or the understood errors, they are identical light curves, which is really quite interesting. You can see the 5-day time for 3 magnitudes, fading for 3 magnitudes. You can see the bit of the quiescence, and you can see this secondary eruption. And that secondary eruption is unique amongst novae, and a lot of people speculate what might be causing that, and there's no generally accepted explanation. One thought is, and by the way, that the amount of energy released is about 1/10 in the secondary eruption. It lasts much longer, and various theories have been put in place, but one of the ones that has yet to be tested is that during that 80-day quiescence period, material is still passing from the red giant onto the white dwarf, so there's still accretion happening, and the white dwarf is still really hot because it's undergone that eruption. So that actually the sufficient material with the heat may cause that secondary nova eruption. It'd be interesting to see whether that happens the third time round, of course. If you analyse the long-term light curve at quiescence of Coronae Borealis, you can see 2 kinds of variations. One is a kind of random variation called flickering, which isn't shown here. I'll come back to it later. But the other one is this sinusoidal modulation in the light curve, and it's called ellipsoidal modulation. And the reason for this is quite well understood. And that's it. If you remember the 2-star system, the high gravitational potential white dwarf is deforming the red giant star into a sort of teardrop shaped object. And as you can see in 1, 2, 3, 4, if the profile facing Earth has the larger bit of the teardrop, so to speak, so the non-circular bit, it's going to be brighter than when you just have the circular part facing you. And the difference between the maximum is 227 days, and that corresponds to this orbital period of the red giant around the white dwarf. Okay, so let's roll forward to more like the present day. So for 69 years, Coronae Borealis has been sort of lumbering along at quiescence, but all that changed in February 2020 2015, and the star suddenly brightened by about 3/4 of a magnitude and entered what is called a superactive state. So brighter, but also bluer. And it's been in that superactive state for the last few years. And observers have been monitoring it very closely. But remarkably, this superactive state is almost identical to what was observed in 1938, so some 8 years before the previous eruption of our Coronae Borealis. So people have been saying, something's happening. What are we going to see? Now, this Brad Schaefer fellow has analysed very carefully the light curve from around the 1946 eruption. And he's been able to plot this brightening phase that you can see at the beginning, the superactive state, but then it goes into this dip, which I'm going to call a Peltier dip, because this is the dip that Leslie Peltier reported in 1945 that made him think, something's going on here. So there is this pre-eruption dip in late 1945. Now what Schaefer has done is taken the light curve from today. So if you look at the blue light curve, you can see the step up in 2015, superactive states occurring. And he's plotted in the purple line the light curve of the 1946 eruption. And by sliding those backwards and forwards, he's tried to predict when the next eruption will occur. And what he says is that the superactive state lasts around 9 years. Then it goes into this a dip that lasts around 1 year. And during that dip, it reaches a minimum. And that minimum occurred 3 months before the eruption. So there are already some clues to look out for over the next few months. And he predicted in March, or when the paper was published in March, the eruption may occur in the middle of 2025, but there are quite some large error bars there, and it could be anywhere between March 24 and September 26. The question is when will it happen, and what are the clues that are emerging? So one of the clues may be when this superactive state begins to decline. So begins to enter this Peltier dip. When might that happen? In fact, the question, more relevant question, maybe, has it already started? This is a light curve from one single observer. I've taken the data points of John Toon. That's to avoid scatter because different observers sometimes assign different magnitudes. They see the star differently. So taking one observer gets rid of that error or scatter between observers. And you can see that since the end of last year, the star has actually been getting a bit fainter. It may be a bit too early to say this is the beginning of the beginning of the dip, or the end of the. It's almost certainly the end of the superactive state. So that's one thing that we have observed that's a bit odd, and we're getting a bit suspicious. The fade. Another one is around this flickering. So flickering is a phenomenon that is observed in most cataclysmic variables, of which novae are a component. And one of the explanations for flickering is that when this gas is coming off the secondary star into the accretion disk, it's a little bit lumpy, so it's not continuous flow. And when it hits when the flow hits the accretion disk around the white dwarf, you get these changes in brightness because of the lumpiness of the material. It's essentially a random or stochastic change. It turns out that during this recent superactive state, the amount of flickering, the degree of flickering, went down, which is interesting for all those years. And yet, at the end of last year, people began to say that the flickering is once again reappearing. This has been observed by amateurs, professionals, but also people observing through a telescope with their eye. John Toon on several nights has observed flickering, the rapid change, rapid modulation in brightness of this star. And there have been a couple of recent astronomers' telegrams that draw attention to this, and one says, does it mean that the superactive state is over? and there's a light curve there, which is over a few hours, that shows that you can see they've ran them up and down. There's no particular period here. There are random variations. You can see that they're bigger in ultraviolet light, which is the light blue points, than the blue light, which is the blue points, and bigger than in the green or visual band. So again, something else has changed there. So flickering is reappearing. There's something else happening, and David Boyd has alerted me to this only this week, because David has been carrying out spectroscopy on this star for some period of time. And if you show if you see the top plot there, you can see the spectrum that he's recording. The question is, what's going on there? Lots of lines, lots of ups and downs. And the explanation is derived from, once again, what is happening in this symbiotic system. So there are a number of light sources there. The principal ones are the white dwarf. That's very bright. But pretty much all its output is in ultraviolet light, so we're not seeing that. We're certainly not seeing that in the spectrum that's shown here. You then have this red giant, this M4 red giant star, which is a source of light. And then you have this bathing of the two stars in this nebula that's surrounding them. And radiation, UV radiation, particularly given off by the white dwarf, can excite the gas molecules, which remain hydrogen and some helium, in that nebula. So what David's done in the spectra below is to plot the spectrum he recorded at the top with a reference spectrum of a known red giant of spectral type M4. And the M4 is contributing that sawtooth pattern, the zigzag lines, and those are molecular bands of things like titanium oxide. So molecules, because this star is cool, molecules can still exist in the red giant. So you can see that. You can see the large hydrogen alpha peak, and he's taken the difference of those, and that's what's shown in the bottom here. And that is pretty much the pure nebular spectrum. That's the gas surrounding these two stars. It's mainly hydrogen and helium. And what David has noticed is that these emission lines are the lowest they've ever been since the beginning of the superactive state. So he says either this is caused either by the UV emission of the white dwarf declining over that time, or there's something that's blocking the light. And I'll come back to that very shortly. So again, something is changing, something's happening in this system almost as we speak. So let's look at these predictions again. So folklore, or the thing I was brought up on, is that the next eruption will be 2026. Brad Schaefer, in a paper a few years ago, came up with another derivation, clearly at the wrong on one end of the time scale, but he could still be right on the other end of the time scale. Lunar and co-workers analysed the same data set as Schaefer and came up with another time window, so it depends what assumptions you use. And in the most recent paper, it's the date somewhere between March 2024 and September 2026. However, when he wrote this paper, he had no suspicion that the superactive state might be coming to an end. So my thinking is that this eruption is going to occur sooner than the window that he showed here, possibly within the next 12 months. So please observe this star. How do you do it? Well, it's really easy to look at the location of where this eruption will occur. So if you go out at midnight tonight, well, I think that was midnight. Oh no, it's midnight tomorrow night. Right, it is midnight tonight, yes. You look south, high up in the sky, you'll see Arcturus, brightest star in the constellation of Boötes, and just nestling to the left of Boötes, you'll see the northern crown, Coronae Borealis. So it's between Boötes and Hercules, so that's easy to spot. Zooming in a bit more, there's the Northern Crown there. Lovely little ringlet of stars. T is just off the edge near Epsilon, just outside that little ringlet. Whilst you're in the area, don't forget to look out for another famous variable star that I think Nick might mention in his talk later, Coronae Borealis, which is also doing something very, very interesting at the moment. I'll leave that cliffhanger for later.
Spoiler.
I'm not saying what it is. Charts are available from the variable star section website in order to be able to make the comparisons. This is an image of the region taken early last month, again by Mazin Yunus. Probably colour image there. See Epsilon Coronae Borealis at the top and the very faint sort of 9th, 10th magnitude T simmering away down near the bottom. So let's look at what to observe. Well, a number of things you can do. If you're a visual observer, go out and observe this nightly is a suggestion, because it could happen tonight, don't forget. Just because the people have come up with these predictions, they may be wrong. They're almost certainly going to be wrong to a degree. So visual observing is really important, especially to keep that long-term light curve to compare back to the previous two eruptions. You may want to see if you can see flickering, so look at it for a few minutes. Do you see changes in the brightness? CCD photometry is also highly desirable, again, on a nightly basis. These could just be these could be single data points, just to get a fix tonight. What is the brightness? Has it gone into eruption? Or it could be you sit on the star for a few hours and try to measure this degree of flickering. And one of our colleagues, Chris Lloyd, in the variable stars section, is going to analyse some of these data for flickering to see whether they're clues, whether the flickering changes with time. And this would require exposures less than 30 seconds. You don't want to be too long, otherwise you get all the flickering occurring during the exposure. And preferably with a filter, and preferably with a B filter. I should say on the visual side, you'll need a small telescope for doing this. It's 9th or 10th magnitude. But once the Peltier dip kicks in, it might fade to 12th magnitude, and that's why we've just recently re-released the comparison star sequence, which has fainter comparison stars. And of course, spectroscopy. So does the spectrum continue to evolve as we come out of the superactive state and into this dip? And of course, what happens during the eruption? So what to look out for? So the end of the superactive phase, we need that to be confirmed, whether we really are through that at the moment. We need to monitor this pre-eruption dip. And once we see the minimum of that and the rise, that could be our 3-month warning. And then, of course, there's the eruption itself. So who will be the first to spot the eruption? I'd so dearly love this to be an amateur astronomer, to go out with binoculars, scanning the region one night and observe and discover that eruption. And when the eruption happens, it doesn't. The show isn't over, because don't forget, we anticipate there will be a second eruption. Or will there? Just because it's happened twice before, these things don't happen like that. The other thing we want to do is monitor the orbital period before, during and after the eruption, because what was observed in 1946 is that there was a stepwise change in the orbital period. It became longer by several hours. And again, the model has been trying to work out what's going on there, but it could be that the two stars, component stars, have moved apart. Or the same thing happened this time. We're going to find out. So please do try and observe this star. I think the next, certainly the next 12 months, 18 months, I think are going to be really exciting. And it's going to be astronomy in real time. So that's T Coronae Borealis. I'll just finish with one slide, which is a reminder of our variable star section meeting that is occurring on September the 2nd, and that will be at the Humphrey Rooms in Northampton. So I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Well, exciting stuff. Any questions for Jeremy? Nick James.
Just a comment, Jeremy, with all the Meteor cameras that are currently looking at the sky, and I've used mine and stacked images, and on red objects you can certainly get down to 8th magnitude or something like that. So there's a possibility that we could get a really good record of this outburst in those cameras.
That would be amazing, wouldn't it? Yeah, yeah. Excellent. Keep watching.
Janice and David then. Janice.
Thank you, Jeremy. Great talk. Really interesting. Sorry. I know, not really my thing, but I just wanted to ask you, and forgive me if you mentioned this, but did anyone else confirm the Peltier dip? Was that seen by the other observers? Has it been seen in other cases with other stars? And the UV observations, I don't suppose any of those were done back then, but just as much.
So it was confirmed. So it was quite well characterised back in the 1940s. The dip, and then leading into the eruption. I think there was some. There are some UV observations, but most of the data are in visual or blue light. A lot of the observations were photographic, of course, and many of those were blue sensitive plates.
Thank you.
David?
Is it worth the VSS issuing a protocol for what people should do if they think they see the first person to see it?
Yeah.
I'm thinking very much of what people have been doing with the nova, the recurrent nova and M31. There's a very well-defined protocol on what you should do if you think you've spotted an eruption. It would be nice to have clear instructions on what somebody should do.
I think that's a good suggestion. Let's think through what that protocol would be. I intend to write up for, hopefully, the August Journal some tips about how to observe and what to observe, and perhaps if we formulated that at the time. Yeah, don't send a letter to the Daily Star because it will be
It'll arrive 3 weeks later.
well, it'll be antelope units or goodness knows what else.
Any other? John.
Jeremy, what was the periodicity of the flickering? I didn't. You may have said it, but I missed it.
It's all over the place. So it's minutes to tens of minutes.
Minutes to tens of minutes, but not seconds.
Oh no, sorry. It could be seconds as well. So the John Toon visual he was observing for a few minutes, and within that it was going up and down. Flickering is something that people tend to avoid studying because it is so blooming difficult, because there's no periodicity to look for. But that's why I think this time we would like to be able to study that. So if people are able to get those data, then we can do some analyses. So seconds to minutes.
Any other comments? Right. Well, thank you again, Jeremy, for a fascinating. Finally, in this meeting, we have Mick James, Director of the Comet Section, well-known eclipse chaser, and expert on all kinds of things that can happen in the sky, which he will now reveal to you.
Well, possibly so. Yes, thank you, David. So, yes, sky notes. You might see that the sky notes contain a lot of pictures of M101. I'm sure there's a good reason for that. So yes, could we just have the lights down a bit, please? Because there's kind of lots of night sky pictures in here, and it's good to be dark. That's kind of better. Yeah, that's much better. Okay, so sky notes. So we're in the middle of the summer. I think you all know that. And in the summer, we expect to have nice sunny weather. And most of us have, but those of us who are unfortunate and live on the east coast of our island have been suffering really persistent cloud. And I've been finding it incredibly frustrating. I'm in Chelmsford, which is kind of down here somewhere. And people sort of having clear skies and lovely sunshine, and I've just been under this persistent cloud for weeks and weeks and weeks. and it's been very, very, very frustrating when I've seen what other people have had to deal with. But at least when it is clear, it does get dark-ish where I live. Last September, the BAA Elgin meeting, Peter Carson and I went up to Dennis's up in Scotland, and we installed a little camera which looks north from his observatory. And as you can see, he's got an absolutely wonderful northern horizon. So this camera picks up aurorae and other things during the year, but at the moment, it also shows just how incredibly bright the sky is where he lives. He lives 58 degrees north. And actually, our Deep Sky Station director, Callum Potter's recently beaten that. He's moved up to Orkney, and I think he's about 59 degrees north. So anyway, here we are. The time on here is in UT. So this is about 9 p.m. UT, which is 10 o'clock at night. The sun is just setting. And then the next picture is at midnight. And we're not even at midsummer yet, but this is basically Dennis's northern horizon at midnight. It's very pretty, it's lovely. You can actually see this star here, of course, which is Capella, which is the star that we see in a lot of noctilucent cloud pictures at this time of the year. But yes, it's a kind of demonstration, if we need it, that the Earth has a 23.5 degree tilt in its axis, and if you happen to live far north, even if you've got clear skies at this time of year, it's not really possible to do much in the way of astronomy. So no comet pictures from Dennis at the moment. Some lovely stuff being posted on the members' pages. I particularly like this one. So this is actually a set of images taken by Pat Devine, although in fact it wasn't taken by Pat Devine, it was taken by a Raspberry Pi, which is programmed to wake up every morning just before sunrise and take pictures of the sunrise. And again, another really good demonstration of the fact that not only does the sun, well, the sun effectively moves north declination in the summer and south declination in the winter, and of course that means that the sun moves along the horizon at the point where it rises. So at this time of the year, the sun is rising as close to north as it gets, and setting about as close to north as it gets. And this is a really nice sequence of that happening sunrise over Edinburgh Castle. Again, Edinburgh not quite so far north, but the effect still very impressive. So, okay, if you live up that far north, what can you observe? Obviously the sun. And the sun's actually been quite active recently. Lots of really impressive images being submitted to the association. This was the sun this morning from a spacecraft. I think this is it Solo NDI, or one of the spacecraft images anyway. A few nice active areas there on the sun. It's actually been more active than this. But Simon Dawes has submitted some very nice images of sunspots. So here's one. You get really good impression here of the solar granulation, these small convection cells in the sun's photosphere, but also in the amazing structure that you get within sunspots. And here's another one by Simon showing that group, that larger group there. So sun's definitely worth observing at the moment if you've got the right equipment to observe it. And of course, hopefully, if you're not under the cloud that we have in the east of England, it's actually available in the sky fairly frequently. Steve Knight submitted this one. And me doing my geeks thing, I think thinks that's an A320, Airbus A320, or maybe a 319. But this is of course the sun with something flying in front of it, and it's one of the perils of observing from the south of England is that you get a lot of aircraft flying around, and if you're observing the sun at a particular time of day, you get these things going across. But there you go. So in addition to the nice sunspots there, you've got an aircraft flying over as well. This one I particularly like. This is from Alan Halsey, and this is a hydrogen alpha picture of the sun, but it's taken in a way that's not the normal way that we see these days. Most hydrogen alpha images of the sun are taken using narrowband filters. This is taken using a spectroheliograph, which is effectively a spectroscope, which you can tune to any particular wavelength if you like. And you then scan the spectroscope line across the image, across the focal plane to produce an image. And if you do that fast enough, you can actually see it visually, but you can image it. And the nice thing about these kind of instruments is that you can actually tune it to any wavelength you like. So you don't need to buy a whole set of different filters. You can tune your spectroscope to what you want to look at the time. It's obviously a much more complicated way of observing the sun, but it shows really nice high contrast there of all sorts of features on the sun's surface. So, mentioning the sun, every now and again we've got a useful occulting disk that orbits the Earth that just happens to be the same size of the sun and moves in front of it. That's the moon, of course. And Jeremy said about the ability to predict the path of eclipses. We can do that incredibly accurately. And in fact, my future holidays until the point I can't travel anymore are pretty much determined by eclipses. This is the one that occurred last April, or the April just passed. It was a really interesting eclipse, this one, because it was only just total. So the moon was only just close enough to the Earth to cover the sun, and then only near along the central part of the track. At either end, where the moon the Earth curves downwards, the moon was too far away, and so it was an annular eclipse at the beginning, annular eclipse at the end, and a total eclipse in the middle. And as you can see from the track, it doesn't really cross much in the way of land, but it does conveniently cross a little tiny peninsula in northwest Australia, here, near a town called Exmouth. And luckily there is also a Royal Australian Air Force base there, which serves as an airport. And so it was possible to actually go to Perth and then fly up to see the eclipse. Now I was lucky in that I flew up a couple of days beforehand and I could settle in, and on eclipse day I could get up and have my breakfast, wander over, set up my telescope and whatever. But there was a much more complicated trip which they gave to their key troubleshooter on eclipse trips, which was basically getting something like 200 people up from Perth on the morning of the eclipse. Flew them up, put them on a bus, get them to the eclipse site, see the eclipse, brought them back. And of course that was John who dealt with that side of things, because if anything goes wrong, you want John to be there to sort it out. But amazingly, it worked.
Vividly.
Now, the local people in Exmouth knew that something significant was happening. So this was in the town the night before I went in. They actually had all sorts of things. But yes, indeed, a major event was in progress. And that event was this. This was the total eclipse that we saw. Where we were, it was really short. It was about 56 seconds long. But it was really gorgeous. Because the moon was so close in size to the sun, we actually got to see prominences all around the disk. We got to see the chromosphere as well. This is a video I shot using a Sony A7S camera on the back of a Megrez refractor. You can see that really big prominence there sticking out from the sun. That was gorgeous, really nicely visible in binoculars, but there were other prominences as well. And the corona was magnificent. It was this beautiful symmetrical corona, which is the kind of corona you expect to see coming up to solar maxima. So, yeah, the eclipse was very short, but it was really quality, this one, rather than quantity. And I really enjoyed it. The wide-angle shots here were taken with a GoPro camera, so that gives a kind of good impression of the site we were at. And you can see there a bit more detail in the corona as we go through the eclipse. And then only 56 seconds after it started, it ended with a really impressive diamond ring, which is just about to come up. Now you can see, there it is. Oh, wow. Yeah. So that was a really nice eclipse. And what was really interesting was to compare the prominences that we saw at that eclipse, which were about 0300 UT, to images taken in the UK in hydrogen alpha that following day. And you can see this Carl Bauer picture on the right, my eclipse picture on the left. Really nice correlation between the prominences we saw like 10 hours earlier. And that big prominence there, Carl submitted this extraordinary image of it. So we were just so lucky that this prominence was there at the time of the eclipse, because it was a really, it's probably one of the most prominences I've seen at a total eclipse. It was very, very impressive. So there are a couple of other solar eclipses coming up, both cover the US. There's one in October, but that one's only an annular eclipse, so that's not really worth making too much effort to go to. I mean, if you happen to be anywhere nearby, it's worth looking at, but you don't actually see very much in terms of anything other than kind of the moon going in front of the sun. But Jeremy's already mentioned this one, of course, the really big one, which is, it says May there. That's not good. Don't go on May the 8th, go on April the 8th. This is my sneaky way of trying to avoid too many people booking hotels. But yeah, it crosses Mexico and Texas and then goes up into the US on April the 8th, not May the 8th. I'm not responsible for any errors in this presentation. Anyway, okay, on to other stuff. So another thing that we get at this time of year is some really nice displays in the sky. I was really taken by this image from David Swan, taken on an iPhone, and in fact more and more stuff seems to be taken on iPhones. They are remarkably good these days at taking sky pictures. But this shows all sorts of lovely arcs, circumzenithal arcs, various other arcs, sundogs, all in the ice crystals in cloud. And these are not only just beautiful, but they're a really interesting demonstration of physics as well, physics and optics. And you know, if you want to encourage people to kind of understand a little bit about how optics works, explaining to them why you get these halos, these 22.5-degree halos and the other things is a really good way of doing that. That was ice crystals in tropospheric cloud, so fairly low down. Of course, we're now entering the time of year when noctilucent clouds are visible. But they've been rather slow to start this year, and there haven't been many images from the UK. There have been some images taken from Denmark and Scandinavia generally of NLCs, but we haven't had any certain ones from the UK yet. This is a picture, stretched picture taken from a camera that I've got poking out an upstairs bedroom window that just records continually looking to the north. And we think this is probably NLCs. You can see the structure there, which is quite different from the structure you get in tropospheric cirrus cloud. But it's very, very, very faint. But the thing to do is, this time of the year, looking out, look to the north, look for NLCs. We've got kind of like 6 weeks now going into the NLC season when these things should kick off. Now, normally, as solar activity is increasing, which it is for us at the moment, NLC activity decreases. But there's been some significant volcanic activity over the last couple of years, and that might enhance it. So definitely worth looking out if you've got clear skies. Look to the north around midnight, kind of later than midnight, and see if you can see these silvery clouds, which are high up in the mesosphere, far higher than any terrestrial clouds, so they get illuminated by the sun long before terrestrial clouds get illuminated. So they're usually fairly easy to distinguish from clouds lower down, normal tropospheric clouds. So the moon, it's kind of just gone through a full moon, which was called, I think, the strawberry moon. I saw somewhere. I just hate these names, but the strawberry moon. But you might have noticed when the moon was full last that it was very low down, and that's because we're approaching a thing where the tilt of the moon's orbit lines up with effectively the tilt of the ecliptic. So the moon ends up going very, very far south and very, very far north. So it can either be very high in the sky or very low in the sky. I think it's next year when it reaches one of these extremes, when it's something like 28.5 degrees southern declination. So it's the moon at the moment, when it's full in the summer, is always low, but it's particularly low now compared to what it was several years ago. This rather nice picture of the crescent moon by our president, showing lots of nice features. And of course, trying to get the crescent moon shortly after new moon is always a good fun thing to do. Also low down, also in the twilight, we have recently had quite a nice conjunction, which was the moon here, and then just below it Mars, and then Venus. This rather nice picture from Andrew Patterson shows that. And of course, Venus is a planet that's very, very difficult to miss in the twilight at the moment, extremely bright. It's just been through what's called dichotomy, which is the point where the phase of Venus is exactly half. So that's at the point where it's at its greatest elongation. It should have an exactly half phase. These pictures taken in various different wave bands show that in particular in the UV, you can actually see quite impressive details on Venus. And this is one of the things which I find quite remarkable now, is that amateur images of Venus used to be very bland, but now amateurs are imaging in the UV. They're picking up really impressive atmospheric cloud structures. So this shows that very, very clearly. But we've also got examples here from Peter Tickner showing these images basically showing lots and lots of detail in the planet. Okay, this is upside down for a reason, as you might notice. So most planetary observers seem to present their images with south at the top, whereas some don't. They put north at the top. But I turned this upside down on purpose in order to make it line up with the other images I'm showing. So this is to demonstrate this effect of dichotomy. So there is there's this anomaly that has been reported for many years, that at true dichotomy, when Venus is at its greatest elongation, when it should look exactly a half, it doesn't. It appears to look less than a half. It's called the Terminator anomaly. I think most people now agree that it is either a visual effect or an image processing effect, because essentially Venus's clouds, if you imagine near the terminator, the sun is very low down, so the brightness of the terminator falls off a lot towards the actual sunset point. And so depending on how you process your image or how you look at Venus through a telescope, you don't register that darker part. And this year, various people, Pete Lawrence and others, have processed images to show that actually on June the 4th, when theoretical dichotomy was due, Venus really did look a half phase. So this Terminator anomaly is really a perceptual thing rather than a real thing. But it's interesting to observe, and Paul Abel has done some rather nice drawings, as always, of Venus going through dichotomy, showing this effect quite nicely. We don't have many other planets around at the moment. They're either off behind the sun or they're very low down. If you're in Australia, you'll be lucky enough to see some rather nice views of Saturn at the moment. And Saturn is showing, as it moves around the sun, the orientation of the rings changes depending on our viewing angle. And the rings are closing up now. So you can actually see a lot more of the surface of Saturn because it's not hidden behind the rings. And these rather nice images from Trevor Barry, again, show quite a lot of detail given the current position of Saturn. But the really big news comes from this guy. So this guy is Kiichi Itagaki. He's been discovering things for a very, very long time, sort of 40, 50 years or so. But he has just recently discovered a supernova in the Pinwheel galaxy, M101, which is perfectly positioned for us at the moment in the UK. It's almost at the zenith. So here it is. This is a lovely image from Mazen Yunis showing the supernova popping on and off here. So this is an image taken after the supernova had been discovered, compared with an image taken a couple of years ago, or a year or so ago. And you can see the supernova is really, really prominent in the arm of the galaxy there. Images of this galaxy tend to make you think, well, it must be really easy to see this galaxy. It's got a total magnitude of, I think, about magnitude 8, so it's quite bright. But essentially all of that light is spread over a really large area on the sky. So imaging it is relatively straightforward, but seeing the galaxy visually, even in quite a large telescope, is really hard. However, the supernova is a point-like object, and so the supernova is about 11th magnitude, 3 magnitudes fainter than the galaxy, but it's a star-like object rather than the galaxy. So the supernova is much, much easier to see. I mean, even me, a non-visual observer, I've looked through a telescope and the supernova is visible. I couldn't see the galaxy, but I could see the supernova. And this is from Chelmsford, where the skies aren't particularly good for deep sky. Just rattle through a few more images. Peter Tickness here, before and after image. This really nice one from Ian Sharp, who lives on the south coast, actually not far from Selsey, and it's been one of those lucky ones who's had clear night after clear night, whilst I've been looking up at my sky, cursing the clouds off the North Sea. Andy Wilson got in on the act and did an actual drawing. That's pretty good. So, you know, it is worth looking at this thing visually, because you're seeing something, you know, you're seeing a supernova with your own eyes, which is pretty impressive to do. And it's quite a bright one. We don't often get supernovae this bright. People have been measuring its magnitude, and here's its light curve. What's really interesting is that this thing was detected after the discovery by people looking at their images. It was detected something like getting on for a day before it was discovered. So a really bright supernova was sitting in a very common galaxy for almost a day without somebody discovering it. So that must tell you something about the kind of probability of discovering supernovae now. I was really surprised about that, because I thought, you know, these galaxies were patrolled to death. So the fact that it was there for so long before it was discovered.
We haven't got Ron.
Yeah, well, indeed. Just think, well, no, the trouble is, Ron, what would have happened with Ron is that his telescope would have broken on the night. I was actually really impressed to see that the guy who bought Ron's telescope, the 17-inch and the camera, actually took an image of this supernova, which is really nice, I think, that Ron Arbor's telescope was actually used to image this. It's on the BAA observers. So taking spectra of it as well. So this is with a star analyzer, so fairly low resolution spectrum. But there it is. This was actually taken when the supernova had effectively become a fairly bland object spectroscopically. And this shows this quite nicely. This is a time series of spectra taken by Robin Ledbetter, showing that initially the supernova had quite strong emission lines for a very short period of time, and they all then faded away as the blue end of the spectrum faded as well. And so what you're seeing here towards the end is essentially a black body, the fireball of the supernova, radiating as a cooling black body. So the blue end going away more than the red end. And I just think this is fascinating. I mean, it's amazing stuff done by an amateur. Admittedly, Robin is you know, about the best amateur there is doing this, but it's pretty amazing seeing this in this time lapse. So I better rattle on. You've already kind of started to give away something, but this is our Coronae Borealis. So not the Coronae Borealis, but our Coronae Borealis. And this star has been kind of sitting around at about, 6 magnitude, just under, for quite a while. But there are some indications that it might have started to fade. And this is the latest AAVSO light curve. You can see this fade happening here. So this is definitely a star worth keeping your eye on. So if you're going to be watching T Coronae Borealis, just move a little bit across to the centre of the crown and have a look at R at the same time. Another one that's interesting around at the moment is one of the novae, B1405 CAS, and it's got quite an interesting light curve, had quite a lot of humps when it went off. It's now sort of settled down a bit. But Mike Harlow, using an objective prism this time, again, has taken some low resolution spectra, and you can see the difference between the nova, which has got all of these emission lines, and most of the stars, which are dominated by continuum. So these They may be quite low resolution, but I find these fascinating, these objective prism or the star analyzer images, because they just show you the nova compared to the other things in the field. Right, this is something that I'm particularly keen on. So this is the launch of the JUICE spacecraft on its way to Jupiter. It won't get there until 2031 because it's got a long route. It has to do lots of swing-bys. Launched on the last Ariane 5 because by now Ariane 6 should have come along to replace it, but it hasn't, so it's been delayed. So ESA have had to put lots of stuff on other rockets. In fact, there's an ESA launch coming up. It's going to be on Elon Musk's Falcon 9 next month. But this is the launch of JUICE, an amazing spacecraft that's going to go on its way to Jupiter. You may have seen that there were some problems deploying one of the big radar antennas on JUICE. But after a lot of shaking and firing a couple of mechanical devices, they actually got this thing to deploy. This thing on the right there is one of the ground station dishes that is used to communicate with the spacecraft. It's a 35-meter diameter paraboloid antenna, which weighs something like 600 tons. And I was lucky when I was down in Perth for the eclipse to go out and visit this. This is at a place called New Norcia, about 100 and some odd K outside of Perth. And that's what's used as the receiving antenna and the commanding antenna for this spacecraft. It's going to produce some really spectacular images of the Jovian system. But what I particularly like about the camera's called Janus. So Janus is an acronym, but it's not an acronym in English, it's Latin. So I know you're classically trained. I'd be interested to know, Jovis is obviously Jupiter, Amorum is loved, I guess. If you actually put that into Google Translate, you get the most rubbish translation you can possibly imagine. And in fact, somebody on the Planetary Society used that, and it translated Jovis as Thursday. And it's just rubbish. But I think it means basically the camera that's going to love looking at Jupiter's family, sort of, something like that. But I'd be interested if any classical Latin scholars have got a better translation. But there you go, an instrument on the spacecraft, very posh, with an acronym that's Latin. I like that. We get John Cleese out to help us translate it.
Boris translating. Yeah, Boris translating.
Well, he could do that, yeah. He hasn't got anything else to do. Anyway, as the spacecraft was heading away from the Earth, some of our observers managed to image it. So this is a really nice Grant Privet image when it was about 800,000 K away. You've got the spacecraft on the left there and the upper stage cryogenic booster on the right. Nigel Evans did it amazingly when it was something like 7 million kilometres away. And it's remarkably bright for a spacecraft that far away, but probably because it's got very big solar panels and the angle of the solar panels was just right to make it bright. So it was about 18th magnitude at 7 million kilometres. This is one of the furthest away images of a man-made object that I'm aware of, and it was taken in Ipswich.
That's fantastic.
Okay, so we're kind of coming up to sort of the summer break, but after the summer, of course, we have the Perseid meteors. In fact, our next meeting is not going to be until, I think, September sometime. So remember to look out for the Perseids this year. The maximum of the Perseid meteors, August the 12th, corresponds to almost perfect conditions. The moon is very close to new, and assuming we get clear skies, we should get a really nice view of the Perseids. And there's one of them from my Meteor camera. So as John was talking about earlier, meteor observing has changed quite a lot. Very few people doing visual meteor observing now, but for something like the Perseids, it's still worth getting out and just actually, seeing what meteors look like. It's always good fun. And if you can arrange to do it with other people, that makes it even more fun. So just finally, comets. There's not much going on in the comet world at the moment, but this one, which is always worth looking at, 29P Schwarzmann-Bachmann, has now gone into conjunction, so we won't see it again until the autumn. But the light curve here that has been compiled by Richard Miles for us in the section shows just what an active object this is. And And the other interesting thing about this object this year is that we now know its orbit much better than we used to know it, and we know the positions of stars much better than we used to know it. So it's possible to predict occultations of this object, which is about 60 kilometres wide. And there was a prediction of an occultation that crossed over the UK on May the 7th. Unfortunately, very, very low. I think it was about 12 or 13 degrees above the horizon when this occurred. But Malcolm Jennings in London managed to get a very short interruption in the light curve. You can see it here on the left, which we think is a grazing occultation of this comet. Now, it's an amazing thing that we're able to predict occultations with this level of precision of small objects further away than Jupiter, and then observe them. Amateurs can observe these and do really, really important science. There were quite a few misses. My one is this trail here. The actual path shifted quite a long way west, and the weather wasn't very cooperative to the west, unfortunately, so observers who were in the ideal place didn't actually get a chance to observe it. But this is an amazing achievement. You know, we now have our first comet occultation observed from the UK. Positive comet occultation. In terms of comets that are around at the moment, there isn't a whole lot around. This one, which one is this? 127? No, 287.
Linear.
237.
237P. This is one of Peter's images. So this is the kind of comet that's around at the moment, fairly indistinct. But there is one that's actually brightening up quite nicely, and it's this one, 2023 E1 Atlas. It's brightening up quite rapidly, and we think it should reach maybe 9th magnitude or so in a month's time. Again, a bit like M101 though, it's an extended object, and so even though 9th magnitude sounds quite bright, the comet itself is relatively faint. But it's definitely worth, if you've got right equipment, definitely worth going after it. It's well positioned. It's basically passing through Ursa Minor, so again, it's high up in the sky. You can actually get it on quite small instruments. I photographed it with a 72mm refractor, just as a small green fuzz. So if you want to have a challenge over the summer of photographing a comet, have a go at this one, 2023 E1. Then finally, just a plug before you all go home about this lovely place. This is the view from Flamsteed House at Greenwich, looking down over the amazing view over Greenwich Park. And then this is what you see coming back. And the reason I'm showing these lovely pictures is to encourage you to book up to go to the Comet Section meeting, which is on Saturday, July the 8th. It's at the National Maritime Museum in this wonderful lecture theatre. We're getting it through the kind offices of the National Maritime Museum and Flamsteed Astronomy Society. We're getting it for free, which is a fantastic deal for us. To reciprocate, I want to make sure that it's a really well-attended meeting. We've got some excellent speakers, including Professor Alan Fitzsimmons, who's going to be talking to us about exocomets. So comets that have come from elsewhere and gone into our solar system and then gone back the other way. So if you're interested in coming, all you need to do, go on the website, go and register for the meeting. There's still quite a few places left, but I imagine that as we get closer, those places will get used up. I know some people are waiting to see whether there'll be a train strike that weekend, but once the RMT have announced the dates, hopefully it won't be that weekend, the places will get filled up fairly quickly, I think. So I'd love to see you at the Comet Section meeting. We've got some great speakers. It's a fantastic venue. We're going to get a planetarium show from the planetarium on site as well whilst we're there, related to comets. John will be talking about comets and meteors, and a really good stellar lineup of speakers. So thank you very much. Enjoy your summer. Hopefully you will be in that part of the country that has clear skies, not under the North Sea cloud. Look out for NLCs. Just look out for all the kind of atmospheric phenomena we have at this time of the year. And of course, have a look at that supernova whilst it's still bright. Because it'll fade away, and you'll have missed the opportunity if you don't. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thanks to our other speakers as well. Thanks very much to Hazel Collett for organising this meeting. Thanks to the staff of the IOP and particularly our technician here for all his assistance with streaming the meeting. Thanks all for coming. I hope to see you at one of the section meetings over the summer or the autumn meeting, September meeting at Leicester University, or I'll see you back here for the AGM on the 25th of October. Have a good summer. Thank you.
Thank you. We got you coming to Northampton.